You wrote a scathing note, I thought, yesterday on Mr. Trump and Trump economics. I mean, it's Morning in America. Who takes credit for this jobs report? President Obama, President Trump, or Bill Gross?
Yeah.
Well, if it was a bad report, Trump would certainly dismiss it. But since it's a good report as part of his administration, I'm sure he'll take credit for it. But, you know, to think that these types of numbers, 240,000 jobs created, will continue, it is a bit of a stretch to my way of thinking. The economy itself is only growing at 1.2% according to the Atlanta forecast, and that follows a paltry 2% that quarter before. So economic growth itself is not gangbusters. The jobs appear to be here, and wages are moving ahead decently. So all of those are good for the future, but we shall see. It's a situation where productivity determines growth, and Trump has yet to put forth plans for productivity.
Help us here with the managing of money and linking it into our day-to-day lives. Do we assume a Federal Reserve that is going to be in some form 1 or 2 or 3 and done? Or do you look at this as a measured Greenspan-like move of a many set of rising interest rates?
Yeah, I think it's a mini set. I think the Fed or any central bank has to be careful in terms of where they move to. You know, the Fed has a target called R star, which is the neutral real rate of interest, or the neutral real Fed funds rate. And, you know, it's assumed with 2% inflation that would be 0 on a real basis, or 2% nominally. So the Fed at the moment appears to be headed to 2% nominally, but it's a difficult type of calculation. No one really knows what the neutral rate of interest is in this new normal type of economy. Tom, I characterize what Trump would hope for as the old usual, you know, 3 to 4% economic growth versus 2% in the Obama administration, the new normal. If we can't get to the old usual, then certainly R star and the neutral rate of interest has to be a little bit lower than what would be assumed under a Trump assumption.
Bill Gross, Mario Draghi, the president of the ECB, speaking yesterday, said there's not a sense of urgency in monetary policy. In light of what we saw today with these jobs numbers, in light of what we heard from Fed policymakers last week, do you disagree with him? Do you think we are seeing a new sense of urgency among policymakers, at least in the U.S.?
Well, certainly in the U.S., you know, we've seen some hikes. We're going to see some more. You know, we've been helped in the United States, certainly by the ECB in terms of their quantitative easing, about $80 billion a month. We've been helped by the BOJ, you know, to the tune of the same amount. And without those two central banks buying their particular bonds and having those funds flow back into the United States and into treasuries, then I would think treasuries would be much higher. So what Draghi does is important. He did talk, you know, very neutrally back and forth, as a two-handed economist would, you know, in the past few days. And it's hard to know exactly when he begins to taper. But when the taper comes from Draghi, and I would assume it would come before Kuroda, then the bull market certainly in those countries, you know, can come to an end, and perhaps in the United States as well. I've set a 2.6% target for the Treasury. We're not there yet, but if that's exceeded, I would think it would be because, you know, Draghi and because Kuroda are moving away from their own particular maneuvers.
Bill Gross, you referred to Janet Yellen as a modern-day Goldilocks yesterday in your note, and I've been reading that story with my daughter, so let me torture the metaphor a little bit here. At the end of that story, Goldilocks escapes. She escapes with her life, and the bears get their porridge. How does all this end, do you think?
Well, it depends on your time frame. I think in the long run it ends badly because central banks have created credit at an enormous rate. Let's go back to 71, $1 trillion worth of credit. Now we have $65 trillion worth of credit. That's an enormous growth rate of 10 or 11 or 12%. Yeah. Same thing in China or even more. And so when you create credit, and when you create credit at 4 times as much as you create 1 unit of GDP, then ultimately the situation can't last. It doesn't mean it has to crash. It doesn't speak to Armageddon, but it does suggest that economies slow down once credit creation can no longer be sustained. And I think ultimately that's where we're headed.